right, we're going to get back into the kings of Israel. Let's start here with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this word. Thank you for what you've given us and done for us. Thank you for the message that we have in David that you've recorded for us of what it looks like to pursue you throughout life. I pray that you would just make these things real to us, that you would help us to be changed by it. Lord, I pray you'd open the word to us this morning and help me to get out of your way, and that we'd grow closer to the image of who you are. In Jesus' precious name, amen. All right, Kings of Israel, this will be lesson 36. I don't know about you guys, but I've been having a ball with this study. I enjoy it every week. I take a chapter or two, or I read through the book of 1st or 2nd Samuel and then come back, and I've done that over and over through the study, and I feel like I've gotten to know these characters so well that honestly, the more that I study and read this, the more I enjoy studying and reading this, because I get to know who they are and what they're doing and why, and it's just a lot of fun. So let's get into 2 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 23. We're going to get a little bit of a recap here. And the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over. The king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. So Absalom has separated himself from David and gone down to Hebron, where David's castle was during the period that before he took over the entire country. And Absalom has set up his alternate kingdom down there in Hebron, and as David hears about it and it becomes a strong conspiracy, it says, then David decides to take off out of, what happened to my slide? David decides to take off. Absalom comes up north to Jerusalem. David heads out sort of to the northeast over to Jordan. We'll get into that trail today. And this is where we sort of pick up the story. Now, right here in this kind of a topo map here, you see the city of David right there on that sort of peninsula that comes out. David's castle's toward the north side, the upper side of that, and they would have left through the gates up there by the Kidron Valley and then crossed that valley. That's where the people were weeping. He came up the Mount of Olives right there, and he stopped right there on top of Mount of Olives. And we ended here last week, and I want to catch up with that because it reminds us of the emotional state that David is in as he comes down the hill and he meets a couple of characters. 2 Samuel 15:32, and it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God, and we have a recording of this in Psalms 41, 2, and 3. Let's look at just a little bit where we finished up last week in Psalms 43. It says, "Judge me, O God, and plead my cause against an ungodly nation." So David asked, look at my life, Lord, and protect me. He says, "Oh, deliver me from the deceitful and unjust man." So again, it was nation and then man, singular. He's talking about Absalom and the people that have joined him. "For thou art the God of my strength. Why dost thou cast me off? Why go I into mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? O send out thy light and thy truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me unto thy holy hill and to thy tabernacles." David has left Israel, or left Jerusalem. He's looking back at his house at the Temple Mount up there. He's looking back at the castle, and he's praying, "Lord, bring me back to that tabernacle, to that place, to that area for me to worship you there." And he says, "When I go unto the altar of God, unto God my exceeding joy, yea, upon the harp will I praise thee. O God, my God, why art thou cast down, O my soul, and why art thou disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him, who is the health of my countenance and my God." So as David sits there on the top of the Mount of Olives, he's praying to the Lord. He's encouraging himself in the Lord. He's saying, "Lord, let me come back to the city where you've called me from. Let me come back and play and sing to you and praise you in this place, and let my exile be short." Now, as David leaves from the top of Mount of Olives and and he starts to descend this long grade, and he'll drop off into this valley that will then turn to the northeast and follow that valley up by a couple of towns there. As he's descending the Mount of Olives, he's looking across the valley, and he sees Nob, the city where Saul killed the priest, the city of priests there. And as he's going down there, he starts to meet different people that have been important in his life. And we'll get to sit on his shoulder and look at some of those conversations. Verse 32, and it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount where he worshiped God, behold, Hushai, the Archite, came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. Unto whom David said, if thou passest on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. So as the guy comes up and he talks to David, David says, you're an older guy, and if you follow me into the wilderness, you're just going to be a burden. You're just going to be difficult. Now, I think reading between the lines here, some of this is David saying, we're going to a rough area, and I don't want that for your life. You can escape the hardship that's in front of me. You go back home to where you've lived for the last 20 years, and I'm going to go to the wilderness. But then David comes up with a way that Hushai can help him. Look at 1 Chronicles chapter 27, and you get a picture of who this guy is. 1 Chronicles skips over a lot of this story. And at the end of 1 Chronicles, it chronicles the people that were instrumental in David's kingdom. And it says, and Ahithophel, that is Bathsheba's grandfather, and he's also one of the two main conspirators with Absalom as he's overthrowing David. And Ahithophel was the king's counselor, so he counseled David throughout this. And Hushai the Archite was the king's companion. So he is the king's companion, but he's similar in statute to Ahithophel, who was David's main counselor. So in the throne room, if you brought something in and somebody said, okay, so-and-so's here from Zebulun, and he walks in, then Ahithophel's there to turn to David and say, okay, this is who he is, this is who his dad is, this is where they own land and how many cattle in the dispute we had 2 years ago. This is his second wife's name. So when he comes in, David goes, oh, James, it's so good to see you. How's Debbie? And so that's sort of Ahithophel, and then next to him is Hushai. And so after David hears that thing and he wants to talk about it, Hushai is there to kind of bounce ideas off. He's David's companion. He's the guy that is his compadre as he deals with these things. And after Ahithophel was Jehoathah, the son of Bahanai, and Abiathar, the general of the king's army. Now, and the general of the king's army. Abiathar is the high priest when all the priests and nobs were killed, and Abiathar was rescued. And then the general of the king's army was Joab. So that's a list of the people that were important. And it doesn't mention there that Ahithophel betrayed David. Instead, it just recounts his successor in that. Okay, for 2 Samuel 15:34. So now we have an idea who that is. But if thou return to the city and say unto Absalom, I will be thy servant, O king, as I have been thy father's servant hereto, so will I now also be thy servant. Then mayest thou for me defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. So he says, I want you to go back, and it's easy to miss, but he says to his friend, I want you to call Absalom king. He says, I'll be your servant, O king. So he's saying, I want you to abdicate for me and say, David's no longer king, Absalom. You're king. You're in Jerusalem. And then I want you to defeat Ahithophel's counsel. Now, we'll see later that Ahithophel's counsel is though it's from an oracle of God. In other words, he was an extremely insightful counselor. He had knowledge of things that was beyond the information that he had. God is the one that set this entire thing into motion. God is the one that is judging David's house right now because of the sin of David and Bathsheba. So God has worked the principles of this thing, the group, the main people in this, to stack the thing so that this takes place. And one of the things that he does is he makes the counsel of Ahithophel supernaturally good counsel, so that when they get into the city and when this takes place, Absalom has the chutzpah to go out and to overthrow his father, and then to fall the way that he does based on that. So he says, I don't want you to just go with me. I want you to go back, and whatever Ahithophel says, disagree with it. I want you to defeat his counsel, because he knows what should be done, and I want you to overthrow that in Absalom's ears. 15:35. And hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar the priest? Now again, we talked about them last week. They came out with the Ark of the Covenant. David said, don't do that, take that back. That belongs to God. It stays in Jerusalem. And so Zadok, who is the understudy for Abiathar. Abiathar is an older man at this point, and the high priest, though they take the Ark of the Covenant and the other priest and go back to Jerusalem. So David says to his friend Hushai, don't you remember Zadok and Abiathar the priest? Therefore it shall be that what things soever thou shalt hear out of the king's house, thou shalt tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priest. Behold, they have there with them 2 sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them shall ye send unto me everything that ye can hear. So he said, go back, defeat Ahithophel's counsel, but also when you hear what Absalom's going to do, tell the high priest. So you can go to the temple at any time and walk into the temple and talk to the priest. It would be a common thing to do. And then while you're there, say, hey, by the way, this is what Absalom's doing. They'll tell their boys will run to the wilderness and tell me, and I've got a man on the inside. It was a pretty good spy ring. 2 Samuel 30, what chapter am I in? 15? 15:37. So Hushai, David's friend, came unto the city, and Absalom came unto Jerusalem. So that ends chapter 15, and before we get into 16, I want to step back and look at this Ziba and Mephibosheth and their roles, because we're going to meet these characters again in chapter 16. So back in 2 Samuel chapter 9, in verse 1, David has just ascended to the throne, and when he does, a bunch of overzealous David helpers run out and destroy or kill a lot of Saul's family to make sure that there's no challenge to David's authority moving forward. David is beside himself over this, because he had promised Jonathan that I'll protect your family when I ascend the throne. And so most of Jonathan and David and Saul's family have been killed, and David is wondering, is there anything I can do to keep my word at this point? So 2 Samuel 9:1, and David said, is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? And there was one of the house of Saul, a servant, whose name was Ziba. And when they had called him unto David, the king said unto him, art thou not Ziba? And he said, thy servant is he. So Saul was not just king, he had a lot of lands. He had a lot of sheep and goats and wealth and riches. And he had a servant that was over a lot of his other servants. Actually, his servant here had servants. And David is trying to find any of Saul's family, and he calls Ziba to come up and says, aren't you that guy that was ahead of Saul's shepherds and so forth, one of his main servants? And Ziba says, yes, that was me. And the king said, is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may show kindness of God, the kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet. Now, this is an act of faith by Ziba toward King David. What you'll often see is people believe that you are basically like them. You basically have their culture. The thing that drives you is basically the same thing that drives them. In other words, if you find somebody that is given toward thievery, they have a lot of locks on everything, because they believe that everybody's going to try to steal from them, because that's kind of who they are. We saw this with David when Saul was chasing him. David kept saying, don't you understand? I know that you're God's anointed, because David would not touch God's anointed. David was also God's anointed. And he thought, if I can just explain this to Saul, Saul will quit trying to kill me. Because if he understands who we are in God and that we're in submission to God, then Saul's going to get this right. And Saul kept thinking, well, David's trying to usurp my throne. Why? Because that's what Saul would do. If he had the chance, he would have killed God's anointed to take his place. And if David had the chance, he would have supported God's anointed and blessed him. And they both, you can see them talking past each other over and over again because they each believed the other would act in accordance with who they were. So when David says to Ziba, does Jonathan or does Saul have any family left? If Ziba was the kind of guy that would kill in order to secure his throne, his position, then Ziba would have said, nope, not any, because he would have believed David would kill Jonathan's son. But he exhibited faith in David when David asked, is there anyone left of the line of Saul? And he said, yeah, there's one. Then a normal Eastern king would have gone and found this Mephibosheth and killed him to secure his throne and make sure there's nobody coming up. But that's not David's heart, and that wasn't Ziba's heart. Now dropping down to verse 9, 2 Samuel 9:9. The king, so he found out who he was. He's 6 years old. He has lame feet. He's going to protect Mephibosheth. And then we finish up in verse 9. Then the king called unto Ziba, Saul's servant, and said unto him, I have given unto thy master's son all that pertaineth to Saul and to all his house. Now this is a lot. This is early in David's kingdom. He's just ascended the throne and now runs the 10 tribes to the north. It was a big amount of property and wealth that David set aside and said, it's not mine. It's going to go to Mephibosheth, this 6-year-old boy. Why would David do that? Because he was an honorable man that did not care about that sort of wealth. When he got wealth, when he took the Syrians' wealth, when he took the Ammonites' wealth, which was a huge amount of wealth, he put that aside to build God a temple. He didn't enrich himself like Solomon did with all of his palaces and everything coated in gold and all of his bling. David was a warrior, a man with a musical instrument in a stone castle that wanted to praise God and exalt the name of God, and he wasn't all about that wealth. So the first thing he did was he set that aside for Mephibosheth, which would have been a blow to David's wealth at the time. 2 Samuel 9:10, thou therefore, talking to Ziba, and thy sons and thy servants shall till the land for him, and shalt bring in the fruit, that thy master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, thy master's son, shall eat bread away at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So David says to Ziba, I want you to be in charge of Saul's property and wealth and goats and servants and donkeys and the whole 9 yards. I want you to care for that as a steward for Mephibosheth. But Mephibosheth is going to be raised like a prince. He's going to eat at my table in my castle. He's going to have every advantage that I can give him. I'm going to take care of him for Jonathan's sake because it's the right thing to do. So here we get to David is now coming down the Mount of Olives and he's escaping Absalom. He's just finished that prayer. He's just finished sending his friend back to the throne room. He's just finished sending the priest back with the Ark of the Covenant. And then Ziba shows up. And when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of asses saddled, upon them 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisin, and 100 of summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. So the Ziba shows up with a wealth of food from the farm. He meets David as he's coming down the Mount of Olives. Now, Ziba is a guy that just takes care of stuff. And we know guys like this that are the ones that when you have a flat tire or when you have a problem, they're the guys that show up to fix it. My grandfather, Daddy Bill, was like this. When I was a kid, they were part of Second Baptist in Millington. And whenever there was a problem in the parking lot or the plumbing or whatever, we'd jump in the old red Ford. And Daddy Bill would go down there, and he was the guy. He was the fix-it guy for stuff. Ziba doesn't have an army. He doesn't have great advice. He doesn't have some political intrigue, spy messaging. He's got raisins. He's got donkeys. He's got a bottle of something to drink. He's got something to succor David with, to help David with. And we need those folks in our lives. And it's a great ministry. Those people that are that way, that is a wonderful ministry that do that. Verse 2, and the king said unto Ziba, what meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, the asses be for the king's household to ride on. So he said, why are you bringing these things? And he said, I'm bringing you some animals so that the people of your house can ride. Now, he doesn't say so you can, David, because you're old and fat and been in the king too long. But he said, but I'm bringing you some animals so that you can ride, so that your family can ride, so that you guys can have some comfort as you leave, and bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat. So it's victuals, things to eat, and wine for that such as be faint in the wilderness may drink. He's just taking care of the physical things. And the king said, where is thy master's son? So Ziba is bringing Mephibosheth's stuff and giving it to David. And David says, yeah, but where's Mephibosheth? I mean, he's the guy that since he was 6 years old, he was raised in my house and we've taken care of him. And he says, and Ziba said to the king, behold, he abideth at Jerusalem. For he said, today shall the house of Israel restore to me the kingdom of my father. So this poor little rich boy that grew up in David's palace, as soon as something happens and David takes off, there's no loyalty, there's no friendship, David's leaving, I'm going to get to be king now. And so David responds as David would be apt to. Then said the king unto Ziba, behold, thine are all that pertain unto Mephibosheth. And Ziba said, I humbly beseech thee that I may find grace in thy sight, my lord, O king. So Ziba brings him some small amount of things from Mephibosheth's farm and sends David out. David, we appreciate you. Mephibosheth's doing this, but I want you to know I'm behind you. And David said, I just stripped Mephibosheth of everything I gave him, all of Saul's wealth, which was substantial. Now it's yours, Ziba. So it was a huge windfall for Ziba, and I don't think that was his intent. So this is Shimei, which is the hilarious guy that comes down as David's coming down the hill. And when King David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came forth and cursed still as he came. So David is walking down the Mount of Olives, and he's walking sort of a little bit north and to the east, and there's a valley that would run up mostly straight north. And as it comes down, there's a city on the side of the hill up there. And so as he's coming down, here comes this dude, and I don't know, but I imagine he's kind of skinny and sort of like a wild guy character, you know, and he's running down this valley toward where David's walking. And, of course, David's got all his guards and everything. And as he's running, he's yelling out just obscene profanities at David. You blank, 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 blank. And it's sort of a wild character. And he comes down and he starts throwing rocks at David. And it doesn't really hurt anybody. But where David's at, it really hurts his spirit. And it really gets under his skin. But David decides not to do anything. And then as he runs out of rocks, he's just throwing handfuls of dust at David and all the guys with him while he's yelling out cursings. And I'll show you how much it bothers David. But and then when David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came forth and cursed still as he came. And he cast stones at David and at the servants of King David. And all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. So in other words, David wasn't in danger. He's surrounded by mighty men and by guards. Remember, he had his 600 guys with him. But here's this guy, and the guy doesn't seem like he cares if he dies, and he's cursing David. So they've come down the Mount of Olives here. They've come down the Mount of Olives here, and now they're walking. And if you see Bahurim up there just north of Nob, that's where the guy would have been coming down after David. And thus saith Shimei when he cursed, come out, thou bloody man, and thou man of Belial. The Lord hath returned upon thee all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose stead thou hast reigned. And the Lord hath delivered the kingdom unto the hand of Absalom thy son. And behold, thou art taken in thy mischief, because thou art a bloody man. Now, you got to recall where this is and what's happening. David has just gotten done taking away the property of Saul's last living relative, of Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is the last living relative because David's compadres have killed all of Saul's other relatives, which bothered David a lot when it happened. And it hasn't gotten better. So when he comes out and he yells, "You're a bloody man," David agrees with him in some manner. And God calls David a bloody man as well. It's something that he's poking at just the right spot on David. Have you ever had somebody say something to you that's mean-spirited and just enough truth in it that it really does hurt? So this is something that really does hurt David when the guy comes out saying this, and it's painful to him. But I want to see what David does. This is David's last words to his son Solomon. It says, "And behold, thou hast with thee Shimei, the son of Gera of Benjamin, and a Benjamite of Bahurim." So he says, you've got this guy with you, Solomon, who is a Benjamite of Saul's house, not his family, but of his tribe, that is there. And he said, "which cursed me with a grievous curse on the day I went to Mahanaim." So he says, this guy, when he came out, the curse that he delivered to me was very grievous. "But when he came down to meet me at Jordan," which is where David's been going, so the guy followed him for a while, "and I swear unto him by the Lord, saying, I will not put thee to death with a sword." We'll see that later when David's coming back. But he swears to this guy, "Look, I'm not going to take vengeance for your cursing at me, even though it was grievous. Now therefore hold him not guiltless, for thou art a wise man, and knowest that thou oughtest do unto him. But his hoar head bring thou down to the grave with blood." So David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. The last thing David said to his son was, "Kill that guy that said that to me." That was something that just rode David's shoulders for the rest of his life. He was upset about the thing that this fella that came out and yelled at him, it hurt him so grievously. And at the time he said, "You know what? My son is kicking me out of the city. What's worse than that? This is just sticks and stones, and it's just not that big in comparison to all that's going on," but it bothered him for the rest of his life. And the last thing he said to his son was, "Kill that guy," and then he died. And that was the end of David's life. I mean, this is, I'd hate for that to be the last words to my son. "Son, I love you. I'm so proud of you. You're going to be a great king. Anything but kill that dude." And but David just stuck in his craw for the rest of his life. Verse 9. "And Abishai the son of Zeruiah and then said Abishai the son of Zeruiah unto the king." So this is David's nephew, Abishai, the brother of Joab, said unto the king, and Zeruiah is David's sister, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, I pray thee, and take off his head." And this is the thing that haunted David, was that he didn't let his nephew do that. But he answers at the time, because David really is at the bottom emotionally. "And the king said, What have I to do with you, ye sons of Zeruiah?" Because remember, Joab killed Abner, and he he hasn't killed the other one yet, but he's going to kill Absalom as well. But David's like, "You brothers are always out trying to kill somebody. Just stop it." So he says, "So let him curse, because the Lord hath said unto him, Curse David. Who shall then say, Wherefore hast thou done so?" It gives you a picture of what David's heart's like. He's like, God is doing this to me. Nathan came to my house and said, "What you've done in secret, I'm going to do openly." God is the one that's cursed me. And this guy's out here saying mean stuff, but he's agreeing with God. I can't kill him for that until later, and he'll get Solomon to do it. Verse 11. "And David said unto Abishai and to his servants, Behold, my son which came forth of my bowels seeketh my life. How much more may this Benjamite do it? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord hath bidden him. it may be that the Lord will look upon my affliction, and that the Lord will requite me good for his cursing this day. So David said, let it alone. Maybe God will look at what he's saying and what he's doing, and God will have some mercy on me, and will remove this difficult thing that's on to me. And David and his men, and as David and his men went by the way, Shimei went along the hillside over against him and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and cast dust. Can you imagine this? On the worst day of your life, you're walking along the valley, you're going into exile, your son's back there on the throne, and there is this joker running on the ridge next to you, grabbing rocks and sticks and dirt and throwing them at you and cussing at you for like 4 hours while you're hiking. I cannot imagine how much that weighed on David as it went on. But then he'd already said, no, God's done this to me, we can't kill him. And after 2 or 3 hours, David's like, yeah, but I want to. It was an exercise in patience. And the king and all the people that were with him came weary and refreshed themselves there. So they eventually got tired, and they stopped somewhere on the way to Jordan, and they refreshed themselves and rested, and then left and went further the next day. So let's look at Absalom's counsel, the people that are counseling Absalom. And Absalom and all the people of the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. So Absalom, David's son, and the co-conspirators to overthrow David. Now, when you get a group of conspirators like this that are taking from somebody that has put up, you typically don't have the grandest of men with the grandest of purpose. They are overthrowers. They are the type of guys that you don't want next to you while you're sleeping. And so they get there, and the castle's going to be in a bit of an uproar at this time. There's uncertainty going on. And so they're trying to figure out what to do next and to put a council together. And it came to pass that when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, was come to Absalom, that Hushai said unto Absalom, God save the king. God save the king. So Absalom is coming into the castle, and all around him are co-conspirators. And if you look at the Red Army and the turn to communism in Russia, and you look at the guys that were murdering the Bolsheviks, that were murdering so many people, and they were responsible where they would go grab random people off the street and then torture them and shoot them for no purpose except that they were tortured and shot, and it brought people into line. And then 5 years later, the guy that was doing that had that happen to him by his guy that started working for him for no reason but to bring terror, and because they were terrorists, they were terrible people. And so the things that they did were terrible, and they did them to each other. There was no old Bolsheviks by 1940. They all killed each other, and it was awful, and it was murderous. This is who Absalom gets into the castle with. So when David's friend comes up and says, God save the king, God save the king, you would look at it and think, why would you risk it? Like, this was David's friend. Why would you risk having him as a counselor? Because it's a risk to not have him too. Like, everybody that you're co-conspirating with is people that have no honor. And so here's a guy that's going, I serve the king. Well, maybe that's a good thing. So he brings him into the inner circle right away. Verse 17, and Absalom said to Hushai, is this thy kindness to thy friend? Why wentest thou not with thy friend? He goes, are you really acting this way toward your friend, my father? Why didn't you go with him? And Hushai said to Absalom, nay, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his will I be, and with him will I abide. Now, it's an interesting statement because he doesn't say, Absalom, I'm with you. He says, whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel choose, his will I be. So he says, if you win, Absalom, I'm with you. If your dad wins, I'm with him. But the subtext here is he knows that David was chosen of God and not Absalom. So he is at the same time ingratiating himself with Absalom. He is affirming that he's with David. It's an interesting turn of phrase there. Verse 19, and again, Whom should I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son, as I have served in thy father's presence? So will I be in thy presence. Then said Absalom to Ahithophel, give counsel among you what we shall do. So he shows up and he goes, I'm going to serve the throne no matter who's on the throne. And the guy turns to Ahithophel and he says, okay, you and my father's other friend, I want you two to give me counsel and to determine what is it that we should do. And Ahithophel gives the most despicable counsel that that you could think of. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, go unto thy father's concubines, which ye have left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. So they spread Absalom's tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now this is absolutely awful. It was also something that an Eastern king, a culture of the Eastern kings, that they would do when they conquered a king, is to take his wives or his concubines as their own, and it would establish their dominance over that king. These are David's wives. Now, should David have had concubines? No. That's not set up in God's laws and commandments. But it's something that was accepted, that God allowed and even blessed at times. If you remember Jacob's had two wives, and they had children with the concubines that came that they sent with Jacob. And so this is something that Absalom takes his father's, we'll call them wives, his father's concubines, up onto a tent on top of the house, exactly the place where David stood lusting after another man's wife. As David stood, it was on his housetop in the evening that he stood there looking down at Bathsheba, lusting after her, and he was another man's wife. And God said to David, David, what you've done in secret, I'll do in public, I'll do before everybody. So as David stood on that spot and he lusted after another man's wives, David's wives were defiled by his own son in the same place in front of all of Israel. It was an act of abhorrent shame to Israel. It was an act that was in direct contradiction to the law of God. It was an act of sin and iniquity, and it took all sense of honor out of Absalom. It solidified his rebellion against David. Sometimes kids will do this as they get grown and they want to rebel against their parents. They'll go out and do whatever their parents tell them not to do. And it's an act of defiance against godly order. And it's often it's destructive. You see young ladies that have defied and rebelled against their parents shave their heads off, or get piercings and marks and things that remove beauty of a young woman. And you go, well, why would you do that? It's an act of rebellion. It's to say, I'm no longer yours, and I'm taking my beauty away. Absalom, in the same sense, rebels against his father, and he says, I'm removing all sense of honor, and in doing so, I'm solidifying and bringing around the people that are on my side, saying, well, they're never going to work this out. This is a rebellion that will go the course. There's no going back from this. David's got to kill Absalom at this point. And the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as if a man had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. Josephus writes on this some after reading the writers after they came back from Babylon and before, and he said that Ahithophel's counsel was divine often, that it was with divine understanding. And so Ahithophel there gives Absalom counsel. Absalom goes and does it, and that absolutely destroys the house of David in Jerusalem. And so Absalom is there, but it is an ignominy at this point. Next week we'll get into the fight. Ahithophel will counsel to take a few thousand, 12,000, and chase him down, and instead they'll take the whole army and chase David into the wilderness and get chewed up there in the wilderness, and eventually David will come back. But we'll cover that. At least we'll get started in that next week. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you for this time and this word, and thank you for who and what you are. Lord, I'm encouraged by the men that you raised up in David's life, even in the midst of the hardest times of his life, the people that gathered around him to minister to him. Father, I pray that you would help us to be that to each other. Lord, help us to pour out for one another, to love one another, to lift each other up in prayer and in things that are needed. If it's just a bunch of grapes, or Father, if it is godly counsel, God, I pray that you would give us this sort of a heart for each other. I pray that you would just bless this day, that your name would be exalted in Jesus' precious name. Amen.